hopefully you all can see my screen. So again, this is the pre-evaluation link. The link is in the chat box. So if you have any questions, please let us know. But if you haven't had a chance to do that, please try to do that before we get started into the meat of the presentation. Hang on, I got some people that are joining in. Acknowledgements. I just want to thank you all for joining, and a special thank you to Dr. Anderson, Associate Professor at the University of Tennessee College of Nursing. Go Vols. I am an alumni, so super proud, for being our guest speaker today. Hopefully he'll give us some great caregiving tips to help us out in our daily lives. Just a few housekeeping items. Make sure that you're muted. If you have any questions for Dr. Anderson, you can put them in the chat. I'll be watching the chat for him. We are recording this webinar, so please try to keep your specific individual names or locations or anything like that. Don't disclose anything. We don't want to put anybody's business out there. Just use general terms. After the webinar is done, we will upload it to the TCAD YouTube channel, and I'll send that link out. So y'all are welcome to go back and review it or share with somebody later on if you need to. And then after the webinar is completed, we will ask you to complete a post-evaluation. So hopefully you'll have learned something, and we can compare the two to make sure we're providing helpful information. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Anderson. Hold on just 1 minute. Let me stop sharing. Okay. So, Dr. Anderson, I'm going to let you take over.
Okay, thank you very much, Keita. Let me get my slides up here. And are the slides showing? Can you let me know that?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
See it.
Perfect.
It's not in slideshow mode if you wanted it in slideshow mode, but that's up to you.
So it is showing the slideshow and not the notes?
Right, yeah, it's showing the slideshow.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the things that I know and provide some information, and particularly to answer any questions that you have that I might be able to answer. And I appreciate Keita inviting me to be part of this webinar series. And so today I'm going to be talking specifically about how caregivers of people with dementia might use mind-body interventions to support themselves, and in supporting themselves, help to support the person they're providing care for. And as she mentioned, I'm an associate professor in the College of Nursing at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where my research focuses on how can we support caregivers of people with dementia through their caregiving journey. So I have a colleague here at the University of Tennessee, Dr. Carol Myers, who has a radio program on WUOT called Health Connections. And it's a great program in which she takes health-related problems and talks to faculty here at the university and experts and clinicians beyond the university to help us understand how these problems relate to us. And one of the things that she's often said is that data make us credible, but stories make us memorable. And so whenever I'm speaking at a community event particularly, I like to tell a story first before getting into the data and the science and the research. And the story that I like to tell is the story of why it is that I do what I do. So I'm from Grayson County, Virginia. So on the left, you'll see a little snippet of a map there. In Grayson County, for those of you who are not familiar with it, the western tip of Grayson County is right there where Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina intersect. And so growing up in this region, in the Appalachian Mountains, there's a strong sense of what researchers call familialism. Family is very important, and taking care of each other is very important. And on the right,
Dr.
you see
Anderson,
a photograph. Yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but your slides didn't advance. We just still see the first slide.
Oh, that's weird. How about now?
No, we still just see the one. If you go, it looks like if you go up to the top of the PowerPoint and hit slideshow and do start from beginning, you should be able to advance them with the arrows.
Okay, let me try.
And it stopped you sharing too.
Well, I apologize for that. Teams is not the thing that I normally use. So let's see here if I
It's
can.
definitely challenging for sure.
Okay. Let's try this. So are you seeing the title slide?
Yes.
Okay, and now do you see a different slide?
Yes. We got
Perfect.
it.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So no problem. Thank you for letting me know. I would have just kept rambling on, and that's not what you're here for. So data make us credible. Stories make us memorable. So let me start again with my story. So left side, you see a little map there. That's where Grayson County is. That's where I'm from. And on the right, you'll see a photograph taken in Cherokee, North Carolina. So you may recognize it. And I'm the little kid. I'm the little baby there, infant. Not sure how old I am there. Maybe getting close to 2. And seated with me is my great grandmother, Marie, and standing is her daughter, my grandmother, June. And my great grandmother, Granny Marie, developed dementia when she was it really started to show itself in her late 80s, early 90s. And again, as I said, taking care of family is what you do. And so my grandmother, my Granny June, lots of grannies, so hopefully it's not too confusing, was her primary caregiver. Granny Marie moved in to my grandparents' home and stayed there the last 5 years of her life. And my grandmother was her primary full-time caregiver. And then my mother would also help as much as possible because we lived next door to my grandparents. And so when my great grandmother fell and broke her hip, she had to be admitted to a nursing home for rehabilitation care. And my grandmother continued to visit her every day, provide extra care. My mother was doing this as well. And so what I observed was their caregiving experience and how they often put their own health and their own needs on hold to care for my great grandmother, or my mother caring for my great grandmother and my grandmother. And that has a significant impact on their health. And so as I watched this and went through graduate school and started to create my research program, I knew that I wanted to do research in Alzheimer's disease because of the experience that my great grandmother had. And I knew that I wanted to focus on caregiving because of the caregiving experiences I observed my grandmother and my mother taking on. And I really like this quote from Rosalind Carter about why caregiving is important. She says there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And at any point in our life, we can be one or more of these different types of caregivers and care recipients. And so I think it is important for us to focus on how we can support all of the caregivers in this country. And I specifically focus my attention on caregivers of people with dementia. So why else do I do what I do, and why caregivers of people with dementia? Well, here's some data, the most recent data from the Alzheimer's Association, their facts and figures about what we know about Alzheimer's disease and caregiving in this country. And you can see there on the right a lot of different statistics, but I'll focus in on the ones related to caregiving. There are at least, but probably more, 11 million people in this country providing care for someone with Alzheimer's disease or related dementia. That comes out to, when you think about dementia caregivers as well as people who are caring for someone else, whether that's an adult or a child, that's about 1 in 6 adults in this country who are providing care for someone. And that care can be a couple of hours a week to full-time 40 hours a week or more. And that equates to, for dementia caregivers, about 15.3 billion hours of care every year. That's valued at $257 billion, which is in addition to the $355 billion every year that we spend in this country on healthcare for people with dementia. And so Alzheimer's disease and dementia is the most expensive chronic condition that we have in this country. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never seen $357 billion. It's hard for me to conceptualize, $355 billion. It's hard for me to conceptualize what that looks like. And so I did some math because I often will teach statistics here in the College of Nursing. And $355 billion comes out to just over $40 million an hour. So every hour, every day, we're spending on healthcare costs $40 million an hour for people with Alzheimer's disease or dementia. But that $40 million doesn't take into account those unpaid caregiving hours. That's another $29 million an hour. And so when you add it up, we're spending nearly $70 million an hour of every day caring for someone with dementia, whether that's medical care or the care that family caregivers provide. What does that look like here in Tennessee? Well, it's estimated that there are 120,000 people in Tennessee who are living with Alzheimer's disease or related dementia. And there are approximately 3,200 deaths from dementia per 100,000 people in Tennessee every year, which makes us the 7th highest mortality rate in the US related to dementia. So while we're still in the top 10, we've moved down a few spots. Last year we were 4th, and a few years ago we were 1st. We had the highest mortality rate, but we have dropped that down. There are 357,000 caregivers in Tennessee taking care of these people with dementia. And they're providing 483 million hours of care every year, just here in Tennessee. So that works out to 13 hours of care per year per caregiver. And we know that some caregivers are probably providing more, and some caregivers are providing fewer hours of care. But still, 13 hours of care per year is quite a bit. And its estimated value is $6.8 billion. Again, that's just in Tennessee. Caregivers are providing $6.8 billion of unpaid care. So that's roughly $19,000 a year per caregiver. That's a significant cost. And so when you take all these things into account, all of these data, all of these things, you might feel like your hair is on fire. And caregivers sometimes might feel like their hair is on fire. One of the things that we know from our research is that 30 to 40% of caregivers may be living with, experiencing, or have a diagnosis of depression and depressive symptoms, anxiety disorders, other mental health issues that are made worse by providing care, because care is a very stressful situation. As I mentioned, my grandmother and my mother put their own physical health needs on hold to take care of my great-grandmother, let alone thinking about their emotional and mental health needs. Caregivers will often do that. And so the strain of providing care can sometimes be a little too much. And it can feel like Dexter here running around with his hair on fire. So hopefully I can share some information about what we might be able to do about that to support ourselves as caregivers and to support the caregivers in our lives. So that's where mind-body therapy come in. And I'd like you to take a deep breath. And one more. And one more. Mind-body therapies can be that simple. Now, we often think that mind-body therapies require this perfect meditative state, that meditation is something that is only attainable by monks living in monasteries in Nepal. But that's not the case. Mind-body therapies can be quite simple, and even the most simple of therapies and practices can have profound impacts on our health, particularly mental health, and the ways in which we deal with stress. And why is that? Well, mind-body therapies and mindfulness help us to regulate the stress pathways in our body and the way in which our body and our minds and our brains recognize stress and deal with that stress. And again, mindfulness, mind-body therapies, they're all kind of synonymous, can be as simple as the deep breathing exercise we just practiced. Um, they can also involve a lot of different other types of therapies and practices. Most often, I think people think of meditation, but prayer is also a type of mind-body therapy, whether that's prayer for self or prayer for others, which is often in research called intercessory prayer. When we pray for the health and well-being of others, that's known as intercessory prayer. And it's a type of meditation. It can also involve things like yoga and Tai Chi or reflective exercises. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes, as well as sort of classic mindfulness-based stress reduction interventions and classes and courses like those that were developed by John Kabat-Zinn. And so there's a whole variety and menu of mind-body therapies that people can practice. And mind-body therapies are some of the most popular complementary and health-enhancing approaches that people practice in the United States. And it's one of the focuses of the research and the funding that is distributed by the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health at the National Institutes of Health. They specifically focus half of their research dollars and program on mind-body therapies and understanding how mind-body therapies improve health and can enhance health. Mind-body therapies are unique in that they have what we consider to be both top-down and bottom-up effects related to stress and relaxation. So what does that mean? Top-down, like from the brain and our nervous system down into our body, and bottom-up, from our body up into our brains. And so that's why they're often called mind-body therapies, because they engage both areas of our being and help us to regulate stress and to improve relaxation. So what we know is that the stress pathways in our body that come down from the brain and up from the body that help us when, you know, a dog or a bear might be chasing us or other stressful situations happen, mind-body therapies help to regulate those. They help to tamp those down, to decrease those stressful pathways, and help us to learn how to regulate those pathways more consciously and more easily. One of the most significant outcomes that you can get from a mind-body therapy that is important to the stress pathway is sleep, restful sleep, restorative sleep, sleep like this little baby here, where everything is peaceful and wonderful and you wake up feeling refreshed and ready to start the day. But more often than not, living in 2022, particularly during a pandemic situation, whether you're a caregiver or not, sometimes stress has an impact on our sleep, and we don't get the restful sleep that we want. And this is another common problem that caregivers report they experience is sleep disturbances, either insomnia or sleeping too much. The recommended amount of sleep is 7 to 9 hours. And so sometimes caregivers get fewer than 7 hours, and sometimes caregivers get more than 9 hours. And that can have an impact on our sleep pattern, which has an impact on how our body regulates stress. One of the reasons that sleep is really important is related to these cells that you see here on the screen. These are astrocytes. So these are a type of cell in our brain called astrocytes, astro meaning star, because they kind of look like stars in the night sky. And for the longest time, we knew that astrocytes were sort of the housekeepers of the brain, that they helped clear away things in the brain like debris and proteins and things that our brain doesn't need. But we thought that that all just sort of happened passively, that because of the cerebral spinal fluid in our brains, things just sort of floated away. And the astrocytes, while they were involved in that process, were not actively doing anything to help that move along. But about 10 years ago at the University of Rochester, researchers discovered that when we sleep, the astrocytes actually go into action and physically pump the cerebral spinal fluid through the brain to help clear things faster. They really were like the housekeepers of the brain. And the researchers called this system the glymphatic system, different than the lymphatic system, but tangential to that. And they discovered that this glymphatic system is only active during sleep. That these astrocytes only kick into this cleaning mode, this self-cleaning mode for our brain when we are asleep. And that's one of the reasons why adequate and restful sleep is essential and can have such an impact on our mental and physical health. And so again, mind-body therapies, which help us to relax, which help us to regulate our stress, can have a significant impact on improving our ability to gain adequate and restful sleep, thereby engaging this glymphatic system, which can help keep our brains healthy and optimal. So that all sounds well and good. How do we make this happen? Well, you don't have to necessarily do yoga in the middle of a Norwegian fjord here, but that in and of itself is probably relaxing. But I want to talk to you about some of the different mind-body therapies that are most popular in this country and how they have positive effects on the brain and how that can be useful for caregivers. So the first category is what is often called reflective exercise. These are physical exercises that involve a sort of meditative component. Most often, these are things like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, reflective exercises and poses and movements that come from Eastern philosophies like India, China, Japan, and they involve physical movement as well as meditation, whether that's deep breathing or focusing on a particular mantra or a particular thought. Meditative movement is another way of thinking about these. So you might go on a walking meditation. You might go for a walk and be conscious of and specific about the things that you notice. So you might set a goal of going for a walk and noticing 5 animals or plants, different animals or plants on your walk. You might pay attention to the way that the light reflects on different surfaces. All of these types of things that provide a certain amount of focus at the mental level that keep your brain occupied while also keeping the rest of your body moving as well. And what we know from research on these reflective exercises like yoga and Tai Chi is that people who practice these exercises, particularly people who practice these exercises regularly and over time, find that they have improvements in their cognition, their cognitive ability, including things like memory, as well as their physical and emotional well-being. They find that they feel better physically and that they feel better emotionally as well. We also know from research that when you look at mind-body therapies, deep breathing exercises, like the one we practice, again, quite simple, is the most popular of mind-body therapies in this country. That's then followed by things like yoga and Tai Chi. There are yoga classes in almost every community. And even if you can't find a physical yoga class, there are lots of online yoga classes. There are free videos available, lots of different things available on YouTube so that you can practice yoga or Tai Chi or meditative movement in your home, particularly on days like today when it's raining across most of our state. We also know from research that these types of exercises, here in the photo, you see some folks practicing Tai Chi, that the movements provide what's called motor training that helps improve cognition. So as we do these movements, as we do these meditative movements, and we have both focus mentally and physically, that has an improvement on our cognition because it's engaging motor neurons in our brain. There's also cognitive stimulation that improves our ability to focus on something and to provide attention to something. Postural control, it allows us to be able to stand up straighter, to hold our bodies in more control. We're better able to respond to verbal cues. And that also has cognitive stimulation, because a lot of times when you're doing these practices, there's someone who's leading that practice that tells you, okay, now we're moving to the next movement. This is what this movement looks like. And then visual imagery is sometimes engaged during these meditative practices, in which the therapist or the class leader will ask you to picture something visually or to focus on something visually around you. Like if you're outside, you may focus on the trees or birds or children playing. And all of these have an impact on the brain such that they increase circulation to areas of the brain that are related to attention and cognition, that are related to regulating our emotions and being able to handle stress. And they have anti-inflammatory effects as well. And so they increase enzymes and proteins in our body that decrease inflammation and help decrease the things that increase inflammation. So they have a positive impact on inflammation as well. Another broad category of mind-body therapies, and maybe the one that people think of the most when you say something like mindfulness, is meditation and mindfulness. These are also what are often thought of as very ancient practices. People have been doing these things around the world since as long as there have been people around the world. And these practices include things, again, like prayer, different types of meditation, including insight meditation, Zen meditation, and then mindfulness practices like mantra-based mindfulness, where you might repeat a word or a phrase over and over again silently to yourself to maintain focus. Or again, the mindfulness-based stress reduction program that was developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn, which is all about working toward bringing attention to the present moment and being in the present moment and letting go of thoughts that might drag you into the past and have you worrying about things that have already happened, or trying to drag you into the future and have you worrying about things that might happen. Mindfulness meditation, mindfulness-based stress reduction is specific to bringing attention to the present moment to help you reduce stress. So what we know about meditation and mindfulness from research is that it improves memory. People who practice meditation and mindfulness have increased activity in the region of the brain that's responsible, one of the regions of the brain that's responsible for memory, the hippocampus. And so you see increased activity there, increased blood flow, and increase in the actual size and region of the brain there at the hippocampus. So what's known as brain volume, which you see here on the slide. It also, as I mentioned earlier, has a positive impact on sleep. People who practice meditation and mindfulness find it easier to go to sleep, to stay asleep, to wake up feeling refreshed, so having more restful sleep. Meditation and mindfulness also have positive effects on mood. We know that they decrease symptoms and experiences of depression and anxiety. They decrease stress, both feelings of stress mentally and feelings of stress physically in the body. And all of these things, decreased depression, decreased anxiety, decreased stress, help to increase quality of life in the way in which we perceive our life to be going and life satisfaction. And then again, there's also this impact on the physical parts of our brain that are involved in memory and that are involved in emotion. So there are parts of the brain that make up what is known as the limbic system, which is responsible for our emotions and how we express them and how we deal with them. And meditation and mindfulness have physical effects on the limbic system that, again, turn up the volume on the things that we want and turn down the volume on the things that we don't want. Another type of mind-body therapy that some people use that is readily available, in addition to yoga and meditation and mindfulness, is guided imagery. And guided imagery is very similar to meditation, except that there is very much a visual component, a visualization, using your imagination to call up mental images of people, places, things, feelings, to help guide you through a stressful situation or to guide you through the guided imagery session. So you may go onto YouTube or listen to a podcast that might start with some deep breathing exercises and then asks you to imagine yourself in your happy place. That's a very common one. Go to your happy place. What does that look like? And that could be visualizing yourselves in the mountains, visualizing yourself on a beach, visualizing yourself in your home, or somewhere or some other home that you find soothing and relaxing, and then guiding you through various exercises, again, to help increase relaxation and decrease stress. And this stimulation involves various senses and triggers psychological processes such that sometimes, if you're visualizing yourself at the beach, you might feel as if you smell the salt in the air. And all those different stimulations help calm the brain, but also help stimulate areas of the brain that improve emotional regulation, decrease stress, and enhance feelings of well-being. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention previously is that in addition to these different types of therapies being beneficial for everybody, that everybody includes specifically caregivers, but also people with dementia as well. So these are all therapies that a caregiver can practice alone, but that they can also practice with the person that they're caring for. You can all go on a meditative walk, on a mindfulness walk. You can practice some deep breathing exercises in moments of stress when you're both feeling stressful. You could try yoga. You could try Tai Chi, depending on the level of ability and comfort that the person that you're caring for has. And you can try meditation and prayer as well. And there's lots of research, not only to demonstrate the benefits of yoga and reflective exercises and meditation and mindfulness on caregivers, but also people with dementia. When it comes to guided imagery, there's more research on how it's beneficial to caregivers than for people with dementia themselves. A lot of times people have not pursued research on guided imagery for people with dementia under the assumption that people with dementia might have difficulty doing guided imagery, that they might have difficulty in understanding the prompts that ask you to call up specific images, and that they might get frustrated because they have difficulty in either understanding the instructions that they're given or being able to do that. So a lot of people haven't pursued that because there's the assumption that people with dementia can't do this. There is a small amount of research that does demonstrate that, particularly in early stages of dementia, people with dementia are able to do guided imagery and find it beneficial. So guided imagery may not be something that you want to practice with your person, depending on where they are in their dementia journey, but it is something that's beneficial to caregivers and can be beneficial to people with dementia as well. So when we think about caregivers and we think about the experiences that caregivers often have, stress is right up there. And so again, how can we think about these therapies in the context of caregiving and improving health and well-being for caregivers so that they can then better support the people that they're caring for? Because we know that when caregivers are able to manage their stress, when they feel less strain and less anxiety related to the caregiving experience, they report that they're better able to care for their person, that they feel like they're mastering caregiver better, and that they're a more effective caregiver. So as I mentioned before, these types of therapies are beneficial to the experiences that caregivers have, whether that be related to stress or mood, life satisfaction, quality of life. And the research bears that out. Lots of folks have looked at how do we use caregiver-focused interventions of mind-body therapies, whether that's yoga, meditation, guided imagery, and look at how that has an impact on the experiences that caregivers have. And so there's a growing body of research that demonstrates that when caregivers do these exercises specifically, when caregivers take advantage of interventions that are developed for caregivers that fall into this mind-body category, that they do experience significant decreases in stress and mood and quality of life. All of those benefits are greater the longer that you do these types of therapies. So most often these interventions, these programs last anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, where people might take part in a 1 hour or 2 hour session every week and be asked to practice for maybe 20 or 30 minutes a day on the days that they're not in the class. But we also know that there's a cumulative effect. So we know from research that sometimes just one 15-minute session, just one 10-minute session, just simply practicing some deep breathing exercises has an immediate effect on feelings of stress, and that only increases over time. And when we look at the impact of mind-body therapies on physical measures or biological measures, or sometimes called biomarkers, when we look at the impact of mind-body therapies using brain imaging techniques or taking blood samples and looking at inflammatory molecules in our blood that are circulating around our body, we find that there is a small but sometimes significant immediate effect, but that effect only grows over time. The more we practice these therapies, the easier it is to practice them, and the more benefit we begin to experience, and then that benefit only increases over time. So there was a study that was conducted a few years ago with adults who did not identify as caregivers, who were not providing care for people, but they wanted to see what was the impact of mindfulness, a mindfulness meditation practice, on measures of inflammation, on the cells in our body, the cellular response. And what they did was that they had 3 groups of people. They had people who had never practiced meditation before, and they took blood samples from them before and then after a one-time 30-minute meditation practice. They then also had a group of people who had never practiced meditation before, and they took a blood sample before they started practicing, and then led them through a 6-week program of learning meditation, and then took another blood sample. And then they compared those folks with people who've been practicing meditation for more than 10 years. And what they found was that whether you just practice meditation for 15 minutes, whether you've been practicing meditation now for 6 weeks, or whether you've been practicing meditation for 15 years, the changes, the qualitative changes, the things that changed were all the same. Genes that were related to inflammation and aging and cell damage all decreased in their expression. So the expression of those genes decreased. And all of the genes that are related to healthy aging, decreased stress, anti-inflammatory genes, the expression of those genes all increased, even after 15 minutes. The only difference between those 3 groups, the one-time meditators, the 6-week meditators, and the experienced expert meditators, was the degree of change. As you practice this, the magnitude of that change in gene expression increased, but the overall benefits were always the same. One of the most extensively studied interventions for caregivers, and specifically caregivers of people with dementia, is mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR. And this is a program that was developed by John Kabat-Zinn that blends several different types of mind-body therapies together to, again, help people be more in the present moment. So it includes deep breathing exercises. It includes classical mindfulness exercises, as well as some yoga. So it's really tapping into the brain part and the body part, the top down and the bottom up. And when we look at these research studies of caregivers using a mindfulness-based stress reduction intervention, again, we find the same sorts of things: significant decreases in stress and symptoms of depression and anxiety and distress, and improvements in quality of life. And in some of these studies, but not all, when caregivers have reported these reductions in stress and symptoms related to mental health and improvements in quality of life, they've also reported improvements in measures related to the caregiving experience, how burdensome it might feel, how stressful caregiving might feel, how much strain they feel as a caregiver. And while they don't always report what researchers consider to be statistically significant improvements, there's usually generally a positive response on the caregiving experience from the reduction of stress and other symptoms through these mindfulness-based stress reduction interventions. And sometimes, again, we need more research in this area. Those improvements in how the caregivers are feeling and how the caregivers are moving through their day and their caregiving experience has a positive impact on the people that they're caring for. So caregivers report that the person that they're caring for also appears to be less stressed, less agitated, is better able to sleep, and has an improved quality of life. How these therapies work, how mindfulness-based stress reduction work, is also very similar to the ways in which the other therapies work that I mentioned to you. So training in mindfulness has a physical impact on regions of the brain that we associate with attention and our ability to focus on something and to remain focused on something, on our cognition, all of the things that come with cognition, like being able to express ourselves well, being able to understand the information that's being provided to us, and also regions of the brain related to emotion, like that limbic system, that help us deal with stressful situations more calmly, more easily, so that we don't become overwhelmed. And by having these positive impacts on these regions of the brain, mindfulness improves our focus and our ability to use what's known as our working memory, our short-term memory, as well as long-term memory, and decreases in our emotional reactivity. The things that maybe stressed us out before and bothered us more, like traffic jams, don't bother us as much when we practice mindfulness and mind-body therapies over time. So let's take another deep breath. And one more. And one more. Again, practicing these therapies doesn't mean that you have to enroll in a yoga class. Doesn't mean that you have to practice meditation 20 minutes every day for years. It can be as simple as taking a moment to take a few deep breaths, to slow down, and pay attention to the present moment, because that can have an impact on our stress and how we're feeling in that moment. And it gives us that pause that has an impact on our emotional reactivity and how we then proceed with the task at hand. So I've given you an overview, really, of what we know about mind-body therapies and the impact on stress and symptoms and experiences that caregivers might be experiencing. But I really want to be sure that I answer any questions that you have, or at least try, and point you toward any resources that might be useful for you. So I want to know what it is that you want to know from me and what questions that you have for me. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides here in a minute. I have to put a plug in. for a study that we're currently doing here in the College of Nursing, where we're asking caregivers about their experiences and particularly how they are using online resources like this webinar. And so if you're interested in this study, maybe participate in this study, you can go to the link that you see there, caregiving.questionpro.com, or email me, and I'm happy to provide you more information about that study. And you can find my email address here as well as my Twitter handle, because I like to tweet out a lot of things about the work that I'm doing, particularly as it relates to caregivers. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and be attentive to the questions and comments that you might have.
So thank you very much, Dr. Anderson, for this great, and I feel relaxed already just listening to you talk about it.
Wonderful.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions, or if you want to type them in the chat box, that's fine. This is your chance to get some information directly from the source, so feel free to ask any questions you might have. Don't everybody talk at once.
Maybe everybody's too relaxed.
Right? I do have one question. When you're talking about working with people who have dementia as well, not just the caregivers, but also with those that are living with dementia, what are some of the are any of these techniques, does one work better than the other for someone who might be living with dementia, just for caregivers that might need to get a little bit more information?
That's a good question. So I'm not aware of any specific study that's compared directly, oh, well, let's have these caregivers and people with dementia do yoga and have these ones do meditation and see who does better. So that'd be an interesting study to do. The responses usually seem to be the same. What I would suggest is that it is important to think about the level of comfort and ability that the person you're caring for may have. So, and how the therapy or the practice that you want to do might be amenable to that. So for example, yoga can be very, very gentle, and yoga can be quite complicated. But there are lots of yoga programs that are designed for older adults that involve doing different poses and positions and doing the yoga in a chair versus getting down on the floor versus standing up and all of these things. So maybe thinking about the comfort of the person that you're caring for and how maybe a chair yoga intervention or class or video online. Again, there's tons of stuff online. YouTube is a wealth of information. If you think about meditation and mindfulness, thinking about it maybe in terms of 15 minutes, 20 minutes, but not expecting you and your care recipient to sit down for an hour and meditate. I think the benefits are all going to be the same. It's just finding something that appeals to both of you and doing your best, I think, to find, which isn't always easy, but doing your best to find something that has been tailored to either you, the caregiver, or to the person with dementia. And those things are out there. For example, there is a group of folks that I follow on Twitter that does online yoga classes specifically for caregivers. I believe the Twitter handle is Yoga for Caregivers. And one of the things that I thought about this morning, Kita, is I don't know that my slides are that helpful, but I'm happy to come up with like a little info sheet to share with you, maybe send with folks that have some links to some of these online resources for mindfulness and meditation and yoga specifically for caregivers. And I'll also try to find some that include people with dementia. But people are paying attention to this, and there are more programs that are being developed specifically for caregivers and more programs being developed for people with dementia as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Dr. Anderson, hi, this is Amy French with the Alzheimer's Association. I loved your presentation. It's right up my personal alley, and it's something as the program manager with the Alzheimer's Association, we encourage very much people finding their their niche, for engaging them and as a caregiver and the person with dementia together. And I love the idea of like chair yoga, things like that. One of the things that I've done with my early stage group is a program called laughter yoga. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
And it's not mindful per se. It's very unintimidating, very unintimidating. It doesn't even look like what yoga is supposed to look like. So things like that, I think, are a great place for caregivers who are intimidated with the whole idea of mindfulness and practicing something. It can sound like just one more thing they're supposed to be doing that they're not doing, so they're being bad caregivers.
Absolutely.
So I love that idea of finding ways to help them find their niche and keeping it so very, very simple and so very, very basic. 5 minutes a day, if that feels like all you can spare. And I also love the emphasis on it is okay to just take 5 minutes for yourself without your loved one. That's huge. One of the things that I often refer people to as a resource, and there's tons of them out there, is just an online forum like Owls Connected. And just, if you just pose that question in a forum, then you're going to get so many responses from people who are in the same boat as you, having similar experiences, and can share what works for them. And I think another great resource that I found personally for other interests is Facebook groups. Like I fancy myself a runner, which I'm very, very, very slow. So, I hesitate to call myself a runner. Well, I joined a Facebook forum called Slow Runners Community, and I get so much encouragement and so much reinforcement and good ideas from this group. So, those are two really good resources: online forums and things like Facebook, and like you said, Twitter. I'm not a Twitter person, but just finding those groups is not as hard as it sounds. And I think just giving caregivers those tools ready-made, say, hey, let's look right here. Are you on Facebook? Yeah, I'm on Facebook. So, hey, look right here. There's a group right here. Yoga for dementia. Let's join that. Let's just hop on and see what happens. So just making it easy for caregivers to find a way that is not stressful for them to relieve stress.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Amy, and it's good to see you. Part of the research that I do, part of how I try to understand the caregiving experience and how caregivers are navigating their everyday lives is via social media. What they're talking about on social media and how they're using social media. So I've done a lot of research I've used blogs written by caregivers, websites that caregivers maintain where they share their stories about what they're doing and some of the things that they do to care for themselves and for their person is to use complementary therapies like meditation, massage, those kinds of things. And then also Twitter and how people with dementia are using Twitter, but also how caregivers are using Twitter. There are Twitter groups. So one that there are a couple of Twitter groups of both caregivers and then people with dementia, and some mixed groups that meet online, meet virtually online weekly and have chats, Twitter chats with each other and engage with each other on different topics. ALZ chat is one, and they've talked about things like how do you support yourself, how do you support your person, what's the best way to incorporate something like meditation. And those Facebook groups, caregivers often talk about how invaluable they are because Facebook has billions of users around the world, and you can get so much information and support there as well. There is also, and I am not a paid spokesperson for them, but a series that I think is done really well, that is really, I don't want to call it simple, but it makes it very easy to do, but explains the whole process very well. Headspace has a limited series on Netflix. I think maybe there's 6 to 8 episodes. And each episode, I think, is just under 30 minutes. But the first half of the episode is, okay, we're going to do a meditation today, a mindfulness exercise in this episode that helps with stress, that helps with mood, that helps with sleep, and then explains the science behind it, about what's going on and how it might work. And then maybe the last 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, is that actual meditation. And sometimes it's just a meditation, sometimes it's guided imagery, sometimes it's a mix of all the things that I talked about. It's really well done, and it's really quite simple, and is available on Netflix for folks who have Netflix. But there are some that are available on YouTube, and I'll include those links on the resource sheet that I sent to you, Keita.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to ask Dr. Anderson while you have a chance? I guess not. I guess you did so good explaining everything.
Or everybody's just so relaxed that they're just like, whatever, which is good too.
We all need that in the middle of our day. So,
yes.
So I'm going to share my screen again. So thank you, Dr. Anderson, for this wonderful presentation. Yes, whenever you send me that, I'm happy to send that out to everybody. And that way they'll have it if they have people that they're working with that they need to refer them to some of these mindfulness techniques. There is a post evaluation. It is the same, I just skipped my head. It is the same resource as, or the same link as the pre-evaluation. You'll just check at the top if you're doing that. This is the post-evaluation, just to kind of get some feedback and see if how you feel after listening to Dr. Anderson and getting some techniques from him, so we can provide feedback to him if we need to, or anything else that we may do just to make sure we're providing great information for you all. Upcoming events. On Thursday, March the 3rd, we will have a brain health webinar for home health staff, AAAD staff, or anybody else that wants to get just some more brain health webinar or brain health information. They will receive a certificate of completion afterwards. I will be hosting that one. We've gotten a lot of research from different organizations to use in this brain health webinar. Our next professional guided webinar is on Wednesday, March the 16th. And it will be at the same time, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. And the topic for this one is first steps in advanced care planning at any stage of life. So we're going to have Kim, and I do not know if I'm going to pronounce her last name right, but it's Humerick House, I think. She's with the Tennessee End of Life Partnership. And so that's going to be really informative for those who might need some steps on advanced care planning for those that might be living with dementia, or even if you're not, you just need some guidance on advanced care planning. This will be the flyer, and I'll be sending that out probably next week, and I'll also send it out with the link to the YouTube video if anybody's interested. And then if you have any questions for me, there's my email addresses on the screen, or my phone number. I do a monthly newsletter, so if you want to be included on that mail list, just shoot me an email and say, yeah, please include me. It's just got some tips and tricks and different things on there, announcements. We get things from other people. So Dr. Anderson, if you have anything you want to put in our newsletter, feel free to shoot it over to me and I'm happy to add it. And then also, if you just some regular resources for Alzheimer's and other related dementias, if you go to tn.gov/aging, which is the TCAD website, we have a link to some different resources there. We also have caregiver tip sheets. So if you need copies of those, just let me know. I'm happy to print those and mail them to you, or you can download them from there. Alzheimer's Tennessee and then Alzheimer's Association, obviously great resources. So feel free to take advantage of this information, and then I'll send out whatever Dr. Anderson sends me as far as a resource link. So does anybody have anything they want to add? Have any questions, concerns? Yes, Jessica, we will be posting this recording on YouTube. So we'll have that for you if anybody needs it after that. Any other questions, concerns, comments? We're getting a lot of kudos in the chat, Dr. Anderson. All right, well, thank you all for joining. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. And so